It happened so fast I didn't even have time to shout. 1 minute I was walking home from the late shift, jacket zipped up to my throat, music in my ears. The next, hands came out of the dark. Rough, practiced. A shove, a flash of a knife, and then nothing but my own breathing and the echo of footsteps fading down the alley. I don't remember their faces. Just the way the cold air rushed in where my phone had been, the empty weight where my wallet should have pressed against my thigh. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wet concrete, rainwater sliding over the place where I dropped my groceries. The paper bag had split, and oranges rolled into the gutter. I thought about chasing them, then laughed quietly because what would that fix? By the time I started walking again, the rain had turned to a mist that clung to my skin. The city looked washed out, hollow. Neon lights flickered across puddles like electric ghosts. I kept my hands in my pockets, though there was nothing left to guard. I didn't even have a key. I must have walked for an hour. My apartment was miles away, too far to risk on foot. Every time I passed someone, I wanted to stop them, to say I was robbed, but the words stuck. Everyone looked in a hurry, or they looked through me. It's strange how invisible you can feel when you're standing under a streetlight. I found an empty bench outside a shuttered cafe and sat down. The sign above the door still glowed faintly, open 24 hours, though it clearly wasn't. I laughed again, the sound small and cracked. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, just from the exhaustion that seeps in when you realize no one's coming to fix it. I thought about my family too far away, friends busy or asleep. Even if I could borrow a phone, who would I call? Who answers at midnight for someone who never asks for help? Car hissed by, scattering water onto my shoes. That was when I noticed the taxi slowing down at the corner. Its headlights cut through the mist, two tired eyes blinking against the rain. I stood, raised a hand, though I had no plan beyond that. The taxi eased up beside me, engine idling. The door creaked when I opened it. The driver looked like he belonged to the night. Mid to late 30s, dark stubble, a kind of quiet weariness in the way he leaned on the wheel. His jacket was zipped up to his chin, collar frayed. A soft hum came from the radio, some forgotten old song that made the silence feel heavier. "Rough night?" he asked, voice gravelly but not unkind. "Yeah," I managed. My voice sounded small, even to me. "Can you take me to—" I hesitated. My mind blanked on the street name, the number, everything. Maybe because I already knew what I'd have to say next. He nodded toward the back seat. "Hop in. You look frozen." I hesitated. The rain was coming down harder again, running in streaks over the windshield. Behind him, the city stretched in streaks of blue and amber light. It looked almost kind. I climbed in, closing the door behind me. The heater clicked on with a groan. Warm air filled the car, smelling faintly of cigarettes and pine-scented air freshener. I held my hands near the vent, pretending I wasn't shaking. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Where to? That was the moment. The one where honesty felt heavier than shame. My throat tightened. "I can't pay you. I was robbed." For a second, the only sound was the wipers dragging across glass. Then he looked back at me. Not surprised, not angry. Just looking. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Everything?" he asked. I nodded. "Phone, wallet, even my keys." He exhaled, long and low, tapping his fingers on the wheel. Then, after a pause, he said softly, "Get in anyway." The words didn't sound like pity. They sounded like something else, like he'd said them before, maybe to himself. I almost asked him why, but I didn't. He turned on the signal, pulling away from the curb. Streetlights passed over us in rhythmic flashes. My reflection blinked in and out in the glass. Wet hair, pale face, eyes too tired to look frightened anymore. For a while, neither of us spoke. The city thinned into quieter blocks, where shops had their shutters rolled down and windows glowed faintly from the upper floors. "You live around here?" he asked at last. "Not far," I said automatically. Then, after a moment, "At least I used to." He gave a short, understanding nod. "You got somewhere you can go tonight?" I thought about it. There was no one. No spare couch, no friend I could wake up without shame. No, I said finally. Just home. If I can figure out how to get in. The corner of his mouth moved. Half a smile, half something else. That's a long walk in this weather. I looked out the window. I'll manage. He didn't reply, but he didn't turn the car around either. I studied the back of his head, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, the slow, steady movement of his hands on the wheel. There was something steady about him, like he'd seen worse nights than mine. The kind of man who didn't flinch when things went wrong. I broke the silence. You drive nights a lot? Always, he said. Less traffic. Fewer people talking. I gave a faint smile. Except me. That earned a small chuckle. You're all right. At least you say thank you. He glanced at me in the mirror again, eyes softening. You sure you're okay? I hesitated, then shook my head. Not really. He didn't say anything for a long time after that. The car rolled through empty intersections, each light turning green as we approached, as if the city itself didn't want to stop us. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. What's your name? Eli. I'm Adrian. The name settled in the air between us. Simple, unassuming. Thanks for this, I said. He shrugged. Everyone deserves a ride home once in a while. The way he said it made my chest tighten. I turned toward the window, pretending to watch the rain. In the reflection, his eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Steady, unreadable, but not cold. I didn't know then that a single choice, his wrong turn, my silence, would change everything that came after. All I knew was that I felt something shift, almost imperceptibly, like the city exhaling for the first time all night. He drove on. I stopped worrying about where. The heater coughed out another breath of warm air, but the chill inside me wouldn't leave. I kept watching the blur of streetlights slide across the windshield, each flash cutting Adrian's face into brief, solemn frames. The curve of his jaw, the line between his brows, the tired set of his mouth. The cab smelled faintly of coffee that had gone cold and a trace of something human and warm beneath it. Cologne rubbed into the fabric of the seat. For a while, neither of us said anything. The wipers groaned back and forth like a metronome marking time between two strangers. The longer we drove, the less I recognized. Buildings grew older, narrower. Shopfronts gave way to shuttered garages and dim alleys that bent away from the main road. Where did it happen? Adrian's voice broke the quiet. Downtown, I said, near 8th and Lexington. I was coming from work. He nodded slowly, eyes still forward. That area's gone bad at night. You file a report. With what? They took my phone too. A pause. Rough luck. I gave a humorless laugh. Yeah, that's one way to put it. The cab hit a patch of wet asphalt, tires hissing. He steadied the wheel with one hand, the other resting on the gearshift, fingers long and calloused. You got family here? No. I moved last year. College, then a job. Haven't really built much of a circle yet. So you're new, he said, half to himself. City can chew you up when you're new. I looked at him through the mirror. You sound like you've been chewed. He smiled a little, eyes still on the road. Maybe swallowed and spat back out. Something about the dry humor eased me for a moment. I leaned back, watching the faint steam of my breath fade against the glass. He asked gentle questions, what I studied, where I worked, whether I liked it. I found myself answering because his tone wasn't prying. It was simply curious, a man filling the silence with interest instead of noise. I told him about the cramped apartment I rented above a laundromat, about how the machines never stopped humming beneath the floor, how I'd thought the city would feel alive, and instead it just felt loud. He nodded again, that small rhythm he had. I used to think noise meant company, he said quietly. Now I know better. The street ahead forked, and he steered left without asking. The sign for downtown fell behind us. I leaned forward. That's not the way. I know. The words landed heavier than I expected. The hum of the engine suddenly seemed too loud. Where are we going? Relax, he said, glancing back. You said you've got no place to stay. I've got a couch. My heart stuttered. I didn't ask for that. You didn't have to. I stared at the back of his head, trying to read intent in the line of his shoulders. The city outside blurred into narrow lanes lit by half-dead lamps. Every instinct told me to reach for a door handle that didn't want to open while moving. He must have sensed it. His voice softened. Look, I'm not trying to scare you. You just look like you need a place that's dry and safe for a few hours. Safe. The word felt strange in his mouth, like it wanted to be true. I sank back again, forcing a breath. Why would you do that for a stranger? He shrugged one shoulder. Maybe because someone once did it for me. We passed an old church, its windows glowing faintly from candles inside. The light flickered across his face, making him look both older and gentler. I shouldn't be alone tonight, he said, almost under his breath. Then louder. And neither should you. The way he said it wasn't commanding. It was tired, sincere. Still, my pulse climbed. The streets narrowed further until the cab turned into a lane lined with aging brick buildings. A dog barked somewhere above the rain. Adrian slowed, pulled into a small gravel lot beside a rust-streaked staircase, and killed the engine. The sudden silence rang in my ears. I watched droplets crawl down the windshield like tiny trails of light. My voice barely worked. This isn't my neighborhood. I know, he said again. Then he turned toward me. In the dim glow of the dashboard, his eyes looked darker, but not dangerous. Just heavy, like they carried too many unsaid things. You're scared, he murmured. You think I brought you here for something bad. I didn't answer. My hand hovered near the door. He sighed, rubbing a thumb across the steering wheel. I'm not a saint. I'm just tired of driving people to warm homes while I go back to silence. He looked at me again. I don't want money. I'm a poor man myself. But we can still help each other. The way he said help sent a tremor through me. Not because it sounded dirty, but because it sounded honest. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. Rain drummed on the roof, filling the space between us. My reflection swam faintly in the side window. Wide eyes, damp hair, the faint pulse at my throat. What kind of help? I asked, though I already knew what he meant. He didn't answer right away, just reached for the ignition, turned off the lights, and let the darkness settle. The cab became a small, private world. The faint glow of the city outside, the slow cooling of the engine, the echo of our breathing. I've been alone a long time, he said quietly. Too long. I used to think I didn't need anyone. That maybe I wasn't meant to be seen that way. He glanced at me. But sometimes a person shows up when you least expect it. Maybe it's a sign, maybe just a wrong turn. The words should have sounded rehearsed, but they didn't. They trembled at the edges. My chest felt tight. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. He opened his door, the rain whispering in, and stepped out. For a moment I sat frozen, watching him walk around to the passenger side. He stopped under the awning of the stairwell, waiting, not insisting, not calling, just waiting. Something inside me broke loose from caution. I wasn't sure if it was need or exhaustion or the simple craving to be looked at like I mattered. I opened the door and followed. The rain was colder than I expected. He handed me his jacket without a word and led the way up narrow steps that smelled of rust and wet concrete. At the top, a flickering light revealed a plain metal door. He unlocked it and motioned me inside. The apartment was small. One room with a couch, a kitchenette, a desk cluttered with old receipts. It was cleaner than I'd imagined. The air smelled of coffee grounds and rain-soaked fabric. A single lamp glowed on a shelf, casting warm amber across the walls. Adrian toed off his shoes, glanced at me with a small, cautious smile. You can dry off first. Towels are in the bathroom. I hovered near the door. You sure about this? He nodded once. If I wasn't, I wouldn't have turned that wheel. Something about the simplicity of that answer quieted my fear, even as curiosity burned through it. I stepped fully inside. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling the city. The rain kept whispering against the windows, steady and distant. Adrian moved to the counter, filling a kettle, his back turned. The shape of him was broad but tired, the kind of body made by work, not vanity. He spoke without looking up. You keep watching the door like you're planning your escape. Old habit, I said. From what? Disappointment. He gave a small, sad laugh. Then maybe tonight will be a surprise. I didn't answer. My throat was dry, my heart loud. The warmth of the room seeped into me, blurring the edges of caution. In that small, quiet apartment, the world outside felt far away, like it belonged to different people entirely. He set 2 mugs on the table, motioning to the couch. Sit. You can rest as long as you need. No strings unless you want them. I sat slowly, watching steam curl between us. His eyes met mine, steady, searching, the flicker of something unspoken beneath them. The silence stretched, not awkward, not safe either, just charged. The kind of silence where something new could start if either of us dared to move. The door closed with a soft metallic click, and for the first time that night, the city disappeared. No horns, no footsteps, no neon bleeding through the fog. Just the muffled hum of rain pressing against the windows. Adrian's apartment was small, barely more than a single room, but it had a lived-in warmth that surprised me. The walls were the faded color of cigarette smoke. A low couch sat against one side, cushions uneven, a wool blanket thrown over the back. On the kitchenette counter, a stack of dishes leaned like a miniature tower waiting to fall. The faint smell of instant noodles, coffee, and rain-soaked fabric hung in the air. A single lamp glowed near the corner, its light soft and amber. Beside it stood a shelf crowded with small things, an old radio, a chipped mug full of pens, a few framed photographs. I walked closer. The photos were yellowed at the edges. One showed a much younger Adrian, arm around another man, both grinning at the beach. Another was older, a woman with dark hair and a boy, maybe 10, standing beside a car that looked like it belonged to another decade. They looked happy in that faded, permanent way people do in old photos, before time decided otherwise. Adrian came back from the bathroom holding a towel. Here, you're dripping all over the floor. I took it, still looking at the pictures. Your family? He glanced at them briefly before turning away. Used to be. I wanted to ask more, but the tone in his voice made me stop. I dried my hair instead, feeling the awkwardness stretch between us like a thin wire. He moved to the counter and pulled out a pot. You hungry? I've got noodles, maybe some eggs. You don't have to. I know. He cracked the eggs anyway, the sound sharp in the quiet. But you look like you haven't eaten since morning. He wasn't wrong. My stomach answered for me with a quiet growl. I laughed under my breath. Guess that's a yes. While he cooked, I sat on the couch, towel still around my shoulders. My shoes squelched faintly when I moved them. The warmth of the room, the smell of food, the rhythmic hiss of boiling water. It all felt too normal, too gentle for a night that had started with a knife and a shout. Part of me still watched the door, as if the world outside might come bursting back in. Another part wanted to sink deeper into that worn couch and let the exhaustion finally catch me. Adrian set a steaming bowl on the table in front of me. Eat before it cools. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, keeping a polite distance. The light hit the side of his face, catching in the lines near his eyes. There was kindness there, but something else too, loneliness, deep and practiced, like he'd carried it long enough to stop noticing the weight. I took a bite. You cook better than I expected for a taxi driver. He chuckled. Years of trial and error. You learn to feed yourself when no one's waiting at home. I glanced at him. No one at all? He hesitated, turning his mug in his hands. Not for a long time. By choice. I asked before I could stop myself. He gave a small smile. Sad. Maybe even a little embarrassed. Maybe at first. Then it just stayed that way. Easier to tell people you're busy than to tell them the truth. Something in his voice made me set the chopsticks down. What truth? He looked at me for a long moment, then away again. That I don't fit where I'm supposed to. The words hung there, and I understood before he said more. I'm gay, he said finally, quietly. But you learn not to say it out loud too much in this city. People stop calling you for jobs. Some won't even shake your hand. You start pretending you don't mind. The honesty caught me off guard. He said it without theatrics or shame. Just a man stating a fact that had cost him years. I nodded slowly. I know that pretending part. His eyes lifted to mine. You too. I took a breath. Yeah. I used to think I was fine being alone. Safer even. But I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. There was someone once. It ended badly. I told myself I'd moved on, but I think I just stopped letting anyone close enough to find out. He nodded as if he understood every word. We tell ourselves it's better that way. Until nights like this. The rain hit harder against the glass, as if agreeing. I studied his face. The lines of fatigue, the faint stubble, the weariness that looked less like age and more like years spent wanting quietly. He didn't look dangerous anymore. He looked human, too human. We sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the ticking of the old clock and the soft hum of the kettle cooling. He leaned back, eyes half closed. You ever notice how quiet it gets when there's no one waiting for you? I didn't answer. He continued, voice low. You wake up, eat, drive, come home, sleep. No one calls your name, no one leaves a mug in the sink. You start to wonder if maybe you stopped existing somewhere along the way. I swallowed hard. I think I've felt that. He looked at me again, that unreadable gaze softening. Then maybe we're not as different as we look. Something about that line broke through my guard. The fear that had knotted itself around my ribs all night began to loosen. I didn't feel threatened anymore. I felt seen. He stood and carried our empty bowls to the sink, rinsing them quietly. The lamplight threw his shadow across the wall, long and steady. I caught myself thinking that I liked the sound of his voice, the small kindness in his movements, the way he spoke without asking for anything. Then his next words changed everything. If you can't pay with money, he said softly, still facing the sink, stay the night. I'll find another way to feel less alone. The words should have scared me. Maybe they did a little. But more than fear, I felt an ache. Something that recognized itself in his loneliness. He turned around, drying his hands on a towel, meeting my eyes. You don't owe me anything. I just don't want to be alone tonight. Not completely. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I could hear my heartbeat over the rain. I thought of the empty apartment waiting for me, the broken lock, the silence. I thought of how long it had been since anyone had looked at me the way he did. Not as a stranger, but as someone who might matter, even for a night. I stood slowly, unsure if my legs were moving from fear or gravity. He didn't move closer, didn't touch me. Just waited like he had in the rain outside. Adrian, I said his name, tasting the sound of it, steady but trembling. I don't know what this is. Neither do I, he said. Maybe that's the point. The lamp flickered once. The rain softened. The city outside faded into a distant murmur. And for the first time since I'd been robbed, I didn't feel like I'd lost everything. I took a slow breath and stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking until it was filled only with quiet understanding, the kind that exists between two people who have been unseen for too long. He didn't reach for me. He simply said, almost a whisper, you can stay. And for reasons I couldn't yet name, I did. I stood by the window long after Adrian went quiet. Rain hammered the glass. Wind rattled the loose frame like an anxious heartbeat. The city had vanished behind a curtain of storm. Just lightning for streetlights, thunder for company. I told myself I should leave. That staying was crossing some invisible line I wouldn't be able to uncross. My jacket hung on the chair, still damp. My shoes were by the door. Freedom was no more than 3 steps away. But the thought of walking out into that storm felt heavier than staying. Behind me, Adrian moved around the kitchen, the clink of glass and the soft scrape of a bottle cap breaking the silence. You drink? He asked. Sometimes. He poured amber liquid into 2 mismatched cups. Then tonight's sometimes. I turned. The power flickered. The room dimmed to a pulse of candlelight from the small lamp on the counter. For an instant, the whole apartment looked unreal, like a photograph left too long in the darkroom. He handed me a cup. Our fingers brushed. Even that tiny touch felt like static. "It's cheap," he said. "But it's warm." I took a sip. The burn slid down slow, loosening something inside me. "Better than anything I could afford right now." He smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You've got jokes. That's good. Humor's cheaper than therapy." He laughed. A real one this time, rough and unguarded. It filled the room more than the thunder did. I laughed too, and for a moment we weren't two strangers measuring distance. We were just two men trying to remember what laughter sounded like. Another flash lit the room, throwing his face into silver relief. Tired eyes, strong nose, lips pressed together like he was holding back words. I realized I was staring. When the light died, I looked away too quickly. "Storm's getting worse," he murmured. "Yeah." He took a slow drink, then set his cup down. "You can stay here tonight. The couch is not much, but it's dry." I should have said thank you. I should have nodded, turned toward the couch, and ended the night with gratitude and distance. But the way he said it, gentle, resigned, made my chest ache. Instead, I asked, "Do you ever get used to it? Being alone?" He leaned against the counter. "You don't. You just get quieter about it." Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The lamp flickered and steadied. He kept talking softly, almost to himself. "There are nights I pick up fares just to hear another voice. Doesn't matter who. Sometimes it's better than going home to silence." I swirled the liquid in my cup. "That's not the same as company." "I know." He looked at me then, long enough that I felt the air change between us. Thicker, heavier, threaded with something that wasn't quite fear. "I don't want to hurt you," he said quietly. "I just don't want to be alone tonight." The words weren't a question or a demand. They were a confession. I felt my pulse in my throat. "You're not," I said before I could stop myself. We stood there, the storm outside roaring against the windows while inside the world held still. The lightning flickered again, and this time I didn't look away. He stepped closer, slow enough that I could have moved if I wanted to. I didn't. His hand brushed my arm, tentative, almost apologetic. "You're shaking," he whispered. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I'm scared." "So am I." For a second, neither of us breathed. The thunder rolled through the building, deep and low, like the world itself sighing. He moved his hand away, as if giving me a chance to stop this before it began. I should have, but instead, I covered his hand with mine. His skin was warm, rough from work. The contact felt both wrong and inevitable. The next few moments blurred soft, hesitant motions, the slow gravity of two people stepping toward a line they'd both drawn and erased 100 times in their heads. When he kissed me, it wasn't sudden. It was weary and searching, like he'd been waiting years to remember how. My first instinct was to flinch, but then I didn't. The warmth of him, the smell of rain on his skin, the faint taste of cheap whiskey. It all folded into something that felt dangerously close to safety. I pulled back first, breath uneven. "This is wrong," he finished. "Complicated. Most things worth feeling are." We stood there again, the distance between us full of words neither of us could speak. I looked into his eyes and saw everything he'd been hiding. Fear, hope, exhaustion, longing. It was like looking into a mirror I didn't know existed. He reached out again, slower this time, his thumb tracing the edge of my jaw. The gesture wasn't hungry. It was reverent, unsure. The storm rattled the window like applause we didn't deserve. The rest unfolded in silence, the kind of silence that hums with heartbeat and breath. I won't pretend it was perfect or planned. It wasn't about conquest or rescue. It was about two people meeting halfway across loneliness, finding something human in the ruins of their day. When it was over, we sat side by side on the edge of the couch, the air thick with the scent of rain and warmth and everything we couldn't name. Outside, the thunder drifted further away, the storm moving on without us. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, then rubbed his eyes. "I thought you'd leave," he said quietly. I looked at him, at the faint tremor in his fingers. "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" "Because you asked like you meant it." He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath people take when they've been holding it for years. We sat in the afterglow of the storm, listening to the building settle. I wanted to speak, to name what had happened, but every word felt too fragile for the moment. Finally, he said, "You don't have to stay after tonight." "I know, but I hope you do." I smiled faintly. "We'll see what the morning says." He nodded, eyes half closed, as if that was more honesty than he'd expected. The electricity flickered once more and died, leaving only the rhythmic drip of rain from the eaves and the quiet of two people who had run out of things to hide. For the first time since the alley, since the robbery, since the night began, I felt something like peace, uneasy, temporary, but real. When sleep finally found me, it felt like forgiveness. I woke to quiet, not the silence of fear or emptiness, but the kind that hums with small, living sounds, the low buzz of the refrigerator, the soft patter of leftover rain outside, and somewhere nearby, the slow whistle of a kettle coming to boil. For a few seconds, I didn't move. My body felt heavy, wrapped in the faint warmth left on the couch, the wool blanket pulled halfway over me. The night before came back in fragments. The thunder, the taste of whiskey, the touch that felt too gentle to be wrong. I kept my eyes closed, waiting for the regret to hit, the sharp, familiar sting that comes after a mistake. But it didn't come. Only a strange calm, quiet as the morning itself. When I finally opened my eyes, sunlight was filtering through the curtains, soft and gold. Dust motes floated lazily in the air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a faint smell of wet earth and coffee. Adrian stood by the stove, back to me, humming under his breath. A tune I didn't recognize. Low, tuneless. Maybe something he'd made up to fill the room. He wore the same t-shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled, collar loose. His hair was messy, a little silver showing at the sides. The sight of him like that, ordinary, domestic, sent a strange warmth through me. Not desire this time, something quieter. He turned when he heard me stir. "Hey," he said, voice rough with morning. "You're up." "Yeah." I sat up slowly, rubbing my face. "What time is it?" "Almost 9. You slept like the dead." "Guess I needed it." He nodded toward the counter. "Coffee's ready. Toast too. Don't get excited. It's the cheap kind." I smiled despite myself. "You keep underselling your cooking." He shrugged, pouring 2 mugs. "Makes it harder to disappoint." I took the cup he offered. Our fingers brushed again, and for a heartbeat, we both froze. Not out of awkwardness, but acknowledgement. Last night had happened, and now there was morning. We sat at the small table by the window, the one covered in scratches and coffee rings. Outside, the street glistened with puddles, a few cars hissing by. Somewhere, a child shouted, chasing after a school bus. The city was waking up, unaware that 2 strangers inside a tiny apartment were trying to make sense of what they'd become overnight. The toast was burnt on one side. I ate it anyway. "You don't have to," Adrian said quietly. "Don't have to what?" "Pretend it's good." I looked at him. "I wasn't pretending. It's fine." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're being kind." I set the toast down. "You think I'm staying out of pity?" He didn't answer right away. He stared into his coffee, swirling it absently. "I think maybe you woke up and realized you didn't mean any of it. And I'd understand if you did." "Adrian." He looked up. The lines around his eyes deepened, but his expression was open, raw. It's been a long time since someone stayed the night without it being a mistake. The honesty in his voice hit me harder than anything else. I didn't know how to explain what last night had meant. Not desire, not desperation, but something like recognition. "It wasn't a mistake," I said softly. "I don't know what it was yet, but not that." He exhaled, shoulders easing a little. "You're sure?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm here." A small silence followed. Not heavy, just fragile. He nodded slowly, as if trying to believe me. I sipped my coffee. "You know what's weird? I thought I'd feel ashamed this morning. I don't." He smiled faintly. "That's because shame doesn't live here. There's no room for it. We sat there, half smiling, half silent, the kind of quiet that feels like an agreement. I glanced around at the cluttered counters, the chipped mugs, the faint water stains spreading under the window. You ever think about getting a bigger place? He gave a dry laugh. On a taxi driver's pay? I'm lucky the ceiling doesn't cave in. I could help, I said without thinking. He blinked. Help? Not with money. Just cleaning, fixing stuff. I'm good with tools. He raised an eyebrow. You planning to move in already? I laughed, shaking my head. No, I just mean until I figure things out. I've got nowhere to go, remember? His expression softened again, the humor fading into something gentler. You can stay, if you want. I want to. He looked away quickly, as if embarrassed by how much that meant. All right then, we'll figure it out. The morning light reached across the table, catching the side of his face, his stubble glinting faintly gold. For the first time, I realized how tired he really looked, but it was the kind of tired that comes from living too long without softness, not from work. We finished breakfast quietly. He washed the dishes. I dried them. It felt strange, domestic, almost absurd. Two people who'd met less than 12 hours ago, moving around each other like old roommates who knew where everything belonged. When I set the last mug down, he said, You don't owe me anything, Eli. I know. I mean it. You've had a bad night. I don't want you thinking this was some kind of transaction. I turned to face him. I don't. If anything, I feel like you're the one who gave me something. He frowned lightly. What's that? A reason to stop running. He looked at me for a long time before nodding. Guess we both needed that. The day stretched quietly after that. I helped him sort through a pile of old receipts and coffee-stained papers near the desk. He showed me where he kept spare blankets, and I folded them neatly while he fixed a loose handle on the cupboard. Every small gesture, the passing of a screwdriver, a shared laugh when the drawer stuck again, felt like building a language only the two of us could understand. By noon, the sun had burned through the last of the clouds. The light poured across the room, turning the rain-specked windows into mirrors. I caught my reflection. The bruise near my temple from the robbery, the exhaustion still under my eyes, and behind me Adrian at the stove humming again. It hit me then, in a quiet rush. Safety had come from the most unexpected place. A man I'd met in the back of a taxi. A man who'd taken a wrong turn that led straight to something I didn't know I needed. That afternoon, I told him I'd stay a few days, until I replaced my cards and keys. He just nodded, pretending not to smile too much, though I saw it anyway, and that was how it began. Not with promises or grand gestures, but with coffee, rain, and two people learning how to exist side by side without disappearing. He drove nights, I cooked dinners. Some evenings we said nothing at all, just shared space. Two quiet hearts beating in rhythm with the city's pulse outside. It wasn't love yet, but it was something close, something alive. It's strange how quickly a place stops feeling temporary once it starts holding your silence. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the storm, and somehow, I was still there, in Adrian's apartment that smelled faintly of rain and instant coffee, where the walls hummed at night with the sound of the neighbor's TV and the city breathing below. I kept telling myself I'd move out once things were sorted. My bank reissued my cards, I bought a cheap phone, and work offered me extra shifts to make up for the lost time. Everything was finally returning to normal. Except normal didn't feel like something I wanted anymore. Adrian never asked when I planned to leave. He just made space. One morning there was a second mug set permanently beside the kettle. A spare toothbrush appeared next to his. My jacket found a hook by the door. No big talks, no declarations. Just quiet understanding. Like the tide slowly redrawing the shape of the shore. We built a rhythm that only made sense to us. He drove nights, I worked days. Sometimes he'd get home at dawn, smelling of diesel and rain, and I'd be leaving for work, half awake but smiling. He'd hand me a thermos of coffee and mumble, "Don't let the city eat you alive." I'd answer, "Only if you promise to come back before it does." In the evenings when our schedules overlapped, we cooked together or tried to. Adrian claimed he could make anything edible if you added enough chili sauce. I kept proving him wrong. We laughed over burnt rice, swapped stories about passengers who talked too much, coworkers who didn't talk at all. Sometimes, after dinner, we'd sit on the couch. No TV, no music, just the sound of cars below and the slow tick of the kitchen clock. I'd read while he dozed off mid-sentence. Other times he'd fix something. A leaking tap, a loose screw, a flickering bulb, because he said he couldn't stand broken things. One night, I told him softly, "Then how did you stand me?" He looked up from his work, half smiling. "You weren't broken. You were just lost." And maybe he was right. A month after the robbery, my life was steady again. But the thought of packing up filled me with the kind of ache I couldn't explain. I'd gone from a stranger in his cab to something quieter but deeper. Companionship, yes. Maybe love, though we never used the word. We had our small arguments. About dishes, about music. About how he never let anyone else drive his taxi because she's the only lady who listens. He'd say it with a grin, patting the dashboard affectionately, and I'd roll my eyes but secretly love the way he humanized everything he touched. He wasn't perfect. He could be stubborn, impatient, sometimes quiet for days without explaining why. But his silences were never cruel. They just meant he was thinking about life, about me, about whatever ghosts lingered from before we met. And every time he came back from a late shift and found me half asleep on the couch, he'd brush a hand through my hair, whisper something small, and for a second the world outside didn't exist. One evening, near the end of February, we sat at the same small table where we'd shared toast that first morning. The light outside was fading, painting the sky violet. I'd just gotten my first paycheck since everything went wrong. The envelope sat between us, unopened. "I want to pay you back," I said. He frowned slightly. "For what?" "For the fare that night." "I never did." He leaned back, studying me. "You really think I remember how much it was?" "I do." He shook his head, the corner of his mouth lifting. "You already paid me." "How?" He smiled faintly. "You stayed." I looked at him, really looked, and something in my chest went soft. The air between us was filled with the hum of the kettle, the fading echo of traffic outside, and the quiet kind of love that doesn't need to be announced. "I didn't mean to," I said, half laughing. "I know." He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "But I'm glad you did." Later that night, we drove. He insisted I come with him on his route. Just a short one. Nothing fancy. The city looks better when you don't owe it anything. The taxi smelled the same as it had that first night. Worn leather, engine oil, faint cologne. Only this time, I sat in the passenger seat, watching the streets flow by instead of vanishing behind me. We passed the places I'd walked that night, the cafe with the flickering sign, the bench where I'd sat shivering, the corner where I'd waved him down with a shaking hand. Everything looked smaller now, like memories seen through glass. "Feels different being on this side," I said. He grinned. "Yeah. No more fear, huh?" "Not tonight." We drove in easy silence for a while. Streetlights painted golden stripes across the windshield. The city was half asleep, only late diners and stray cats still awake to see us pass. At a red light, he glanced over. "You ever think about that night? How it could have gone differently?" "All the time," I admitted. "What if I'd just driven you to the police station, dropped you off and gone home?" I smiled softly. "Then we'd both still be lonely." He nodded, eyes on the road. "Guess we took the wrong turn, then." We stopped by the river before heading back. The water reflected the city lights, trembling like melted stars. Adrian leaned against the hood of the taxi, arms crossed. I stood beside him, our shoulders brushing. "You ever think about leaving the city?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes. But then I'd miss this." He turned slightly. "This? The noise? The mess? You?" He chuckled quietly. Careful. That almost sounded like affection. "Almost." He shrugged. "I'm still not used to being someone worth staying for." I looked at him, the reflection of the river light catching his profile. "You should be. You gave me a home before I even knew I needed one." He didn't answer, but his hand found mine. Fingers rough, grip gentle. The city hummed around us. Trains in the distance, a siren somewhere far away, the low pulse of life carrying on. We stood there until the cold started biting through our jackets. He squeezed my hand once before letting go. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." Home. The word hung between us, simple and final. When we pulled into the small gravel lot beneath the apartment later, I watched him turn off the engine, the headlights fading. The silence that followed felt full, not empty. "Adrian," I said quietly. "Yeah. That night, when you said you didn't want to be alone, I didn't realize you were giving me the same thing I was too afraid to ask for." He looked at me for a long time. Then he smiled, slow, genuine, the kind that softens the lines around his eyes. "Guess that makes us even." I laughed softly. "No, I think you're still ahead. Then I'll keep driving until you catch up." Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I think back to that first moment. His voice through the rain, the soft command, "Get in anyway." It sounded like kindness then. Now it feels like fate. I used to think a home was a place. I was wrong. It's a person who waits up when you're late, who leaves the light on even when they know you're coming back. Adrian never asked for promises, and I never made any. We just kept choosing each other. Quietly, every morning we woke up to the same small apartment that had once been a stranger's. He took a wrong turn that night, or maybe the right one, because somehow that road led us both home.